The manor porch wakes like a debt about to call itself a blessing, so you set the horn lamp on the Reeves bench until a warm coin of light lands where rent and vows try to share a page. The winter roll smells of barley flour and old excuses. A slate of names leans against the post. Widows listed not as people, but as maritagia, assets the Lord may sell or gift for their protection. Alice stands beneath that slate with a baker's hands and a washerwoman's shoulders, 2 children behind her like questions, and the steward beside the chest as if wood were conscience. You hang counsel at mouth height where wrists must bruise themselves before mouths turn law into appetite. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named by her, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given, no fines for refusal, thanks collected. The beetle's daughter taps the post with the beetle until the wood hums. The clerk's quill pauses. The steward's smile discovers it needs receipts. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp honest, not the kind that rings for feasts after confiscations. And in the comments, give me the 7-word porch rule you'd actually nail above this bench. Consent asked, contract read, no fines for refusal. I'll pin the strongest and carry them to the next court where custom mistakes itself for providence. You begin with the ledger because paper has been practicing indifference for a century. The clerk reads, Alice, widow, dower in half a messuage, 1 cow, 1 child of age, 1 child in ward, maritagium due to lord, refusal fine at Reeves' will. He looks surprised by his own voice. The horn coin on the page makes due and refusal squirm. Consent asked goes onto the pillar, so every knuckle that reaches for the chest must touch it first. Contract read to woman aloud follows in letters rude enough to survive a storm. Alice brushes each line with the back of her hand as if testing a door. Read, she says. Not please, not sir. This is why you lugged wood here. A man who calls himself practical points toward protection. He suggests marrying Alice to a miller who will keep her fed and repay arrears. You set the horn on the bench until arithmetic and hunger stop pretending to be married. Banns read moves the talk from a whim to a calendar. Witness heard opens the porch to 2 Bath sisters who know what the miller smells like, 1 Guild baker who knows what his scales weigh, and the sacristan who knows which pew he chose for a wife who did not raise a second candle after Easter. The beetle's daughter writes names into a new book titled Thanks and Charges, because town memory should be a towel, not a rumor. Forced marriages thrive on fees. The steward lifts the lid of the chest and lets fines breathe. Fines for refusing a husband, fines for marrying without leave, fines for keeping dower without comfort, fines for a cow eaten by hunger that became the Lord's business. You pin a narrow card across the lip of the box like a blade. No fines for refusal. The steward coughs. He looks at the horn coin on the plank of custom and chooses, for once, to enjoy being furniture. He posts the rate slate under horn, where rests will bruise numbers before mouths invent mercy. Alice's sister arrives with a baby and a comb and the best defense medieval women ever invented, housekeeping that refuses to be private. She lists what Alice can do: knead, keep accounts, mend linen, judge coin with her thumb, calm a cow, find a leak before it becomes a river. She lists what Alice cannot do alone: wait out a lawsuit without work, argue with Latin, stop winter. You slide guardian, named by her, into the book so the man who will co-sign her dower and stand between her and hungry cousins is the man she chooses. Alice names the baker's widow from 2 doors down. The porch claps once, like lids. Consent needs a room as much as law needs a porch. You borrow the manor's quiet chamber, used for counting tithes and pretending to pray, and convert it. On the wall, you hammer the little scroll that keeps every story alive: complaint without fee, witness heard, charge copied, copies given. In that room, Alice speaks without the weight of boots. She says the miller tried to buy last week with a debt he wrote himself, and that the Lord's cousin offered to forgive her late husband's Harriet if she returned the kindness. The clerk's mouth decides it can survive honesty. He copies the charge, pins a retracted underhorn when the cousin retracts, and sends copies given to Alice and the reeve. Paper behaves because wood taught it how. Protection also hides in churches if you let it. The priest clears his throat, tempted to remind everyone that marriage is a sacrament, not an invoice. You angle the horn coin across his banns board until later becomes visible. Banns read means 3 Sundays where the square can object in daylight, not 3 hours where a chest can close in shadow. He reads banns in a key that shares the work with wood. The sacristan pins no anonymous posting beside the banns without asking. Saints love low sentences. The beadle tests your cards the way boys test ladders. He raps the bench with the beadle, raises his fines table, and reads aloud a line you smuggled into his book last month. Slander fined. It matters because widows always attract rhyme when rent runs short. Egg at a face is a groat and a mop. Brick is gale and a shilling. Knife summons charge, not applause. Poets narrow their mouths to fit coins. The square prefers stew when rhyme requires scrubbing. Manor custom keeps a shadow tool designed for moments like this: distraint. A bailiff can take a cow, a cloak, a bed, to encourage prudence. You set the horn on his staff until authority remembers itself. Witness heard invites the guild clerk with the debt book, the Bath sisters with evidence of honest work, the beadle with mops instead of jests. You make the bailiff read copies given when he tries to save time by promising to explain later. He learns to like pointing. Widows are trapped not only by lordship, but by superstition that makes grief a tax. Alice has 1 cow and 1 strip of barley. It is unsafe, a canon says, for a woman to hold land without male counsel. You hand him a broom. The Lane acquired a street theology this winter, and he has decided to enjoy being useful. He sweeps the porch while the Bath sisters post clean linen at the infirmary, and the herb wife nails honey aloud on Sundays where the prior can see it. Care replaces chivalry without asking permission. The steward attempts a last tactic. Harriet robed as piety, the best beast to the Lord when a tenant dies. He calls it ancient law. You call it a yoke. thanks collected goes on the porch rail for those willing to buy Alice's cow with gratitude rather than confiscation. Bread from the Bakers' Guild, vinegar from the Bath Sisters, a wreath from the armourer nailed to her lintel, a day of bellows from the beadle's cousin, a pot of honey from the prior. The ledger of thanks becomes a shield that lets the steward back away without losing face. This is how custom improves, by having somewhere better to stand. The miller appeals to appetite and promises a roof. You point at contract read to woman aloud. He proposes to take her children as apprentices and pay rent to the Lord. You add guardian named by her and watch his smile shrink to fit arithmetic. Alice names the baker's widow again. The miller learns to admire doors. Widows often fear losing dower more than they fear losing themselves. You carve no fines for refusal into the box itself. The steward's thumb learns that line every time it reaches. It becomes his favorite callus. He discovers that towns run better when Wood insults him before everybody else does. He discovers he enjoys clapping for lists. The quiet room that saved burned wrists becomes the room that saves widows' mouths. You install a bench, a dipper, a slate labeled "Copies Given," and a second labeled "Thanks." Women come to whisper into paper. Men come to read back their own handwriting. The beadle sits without his staff and learns to like silence that does work. Alice chooses no, which used to be a cash register. This time it is a sentence. The porch does not cheer. It reads, "Banns read begins. Witness heard continues. Consent asked is asked again, louder because Wood shares it. The miller discovers he can survive adulthood. The bailiff returns his hand to his staff and finds it does not need to be a jaw. The steward leaves the cow with its rightful mouth." Not all endings are recital. Some are inventory. The reeve posts rent posted under horn. The clerk copies consent asked into the margin of the roll where due once sat unexamined. The sacristan keeps no anonymous posting pinned to banns as if it were a beatitude. The beadle's book accumulates retracted and thanks in columns that look like soap. The Bath Sisters write water aloud on a door most men never noticed, and the infirmary adds a basin to the porch for people with pride. A writer from a city 2 days away pauses at the porch, reads your cards, and steals them with good manners. He leaves a note, a list of names from a city that will make your sentences work while you are asleep. He pays with lilies and a coin for honey. You let the theft happen because portability is your ally. By dusk, Alice has not become a proverb. She has become a line in the thanks ledger and a column in the bread account, a name in the banns, a woman with a guardian she chose, a widow who did not pay to refuse. Her children are nowhere near a chest. The porch smells like stew, vinegar, oak, beeswax, and the only thing medieval towns ever needed to make moral progress: receipts. Before we shoulder Part 2, when the bishop's man tries to sell protection as Latin, when the beadle learns to make poets mop without malice, when guild sisters buy baths with ledgers, when the jail discovers love's schedules. Give me the small currency that makes big work possible. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next drill lands while your beam still remembers its height. In the comments, leave your 7-word porch law you will actually hammer where hands live. Consent asked, contract read, no fines for refusal. And type continue if you want me to escort you deeper into the ways poor widows were trapped by marriage for their own good, and how a town posted sentences low enough to trip the habit before it tripped them. The bishop's commissary rides up with Latin sewn into his cloak and wardship folded under his tongue. So you set the horn lamp on the chapter step until a warm coin of light lands where protection usually announces itself with fees. He unrolls a parchment called Tutela Viduarum, guardianship of widows, and points to the line that says the bishop keeps care of poor women and may present them to suitable men, remit fines, or send them to a house of religion in exchange for aid. You hang counsel at mouth height where wrists must bruise before Latin borrows breath. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named by her, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given, no fines for refusal, no dowry seized, thanks collected. The commissary reads the board, then the porch, then the faces. He is used to trumpets. He meets wood. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that pays for daylight and hammers, not for trumpets. And in the comments, write your 7-word wardship law you would actually nail to a chest. Consent asked, contract read, no fines for refusal. I'll pin the strongest and carry them to the next porch where charity invoices women. You begin by refusing to be impressed by conjugations. The commissary quotes cura animarum, care of souls. The sacristan clears his throat with a sound that means only if the soul agrees. Consent asked moves the conversation from velvet to knuckles. The commissary says the bishop will remit the fine for refusal if Alice accepts advice. No fines for refusal already sits on the chest like a lock that learned its job. He says the church can place widows under spiritual custody. Guardian named by her pins the hinge to a woman's mouth, not to a roll of favors. He offers to read a model contract. Contract read to woman aloud guards the only door worth keeping, understanding. The commissary tries the almond-sweet promise next. Convent, he says softly, bread without bruises. Aid would cover the bishop's costs. Dowry in, daily board out, the woman safe as a candle. Magda asks what happens to the dower chest. He says, gift. You nail a card to the chest like a second lid. No dowry seized, key kept by 2. The Bath sisters volunteer their key. Alice gives hers to the baker's widow again. 2 keys make a vow nobody has to believe. The commissary's smile decides to study arithmetic. Protection prefers debt to daylight. You make it pass through both. Banns read pins 3 Sundays to the calendar for any match the commissary imagines. Witness heard opens the porch to women who remember why bread without bruises often came with silence. The beadle's daughter brings her fines table and the beadle, ready to make rhymers mop. The guild clerk brings a basket of copies because copies, given, the same plain miracle that saved pillory faces, saves widows from memory that wishes it were a quill. Alice stands where the horn coin touches the rule and discovers she prefers sentences to blessings. Forced marriages thrive when stew is cold. The Bath sisters produce their rosemary slate and offer an answer older than rent. Keep the water hot. Keep the towels clean. Keep the door bolted. Keep the ledger open. The commissary blinks at a rate board pinned near a copper and finally understands what religion looks like at this address. He buys vinegar for the infirmary. You like him better when he carries things. The Reeves bench tries its oldest trick, Murchit, a fee for marrying out. The steward reads the number without shame. It was written before he learned to be furniture. You set the horn on the slate until Murchit looks like it wishes to retire. Murchit posted. No fines for refusal. Refusal free goes on the pillar in rude letters. Alice asks whether the baker's widow's son may be named for her strip instead. And you tack a new card no poet would think to write. Marriage by poverty forbidden. If a match is a tax, it is not a sacrament. The bailiff of distraints, disappointed that cows have become harder to confiscate in lanes with horn, invents a lease cow argument. The best beast should serve the manor, though owned by Alice. You call witnesses instead of thunder. The Bath sisters produce thanks for barley given, without chest. The guild baker produces thanks for water carried by children named. The herb wife produces thanks for honey allowed on Sundays. Gratitude is heavier than seizure when posted. The bailiff discovers that he likes being bored. The quiet room, built for Burns and widows both, discovers its third vocation, naming guardians. Alice and two other women choose who will stand between them and ingenuity. A Bath sister for one, a beadle's wife for another, a guild elder who remembers being hungry. Guardian named by her gets written beneath three names while steam warms the wall and the beadle raps the beetle once to remind enthusiasm to breathe. Copies go to the clerk, not the chest. Love becomes a line item. The commissary produces one last Latin and you answer with one last board. He claims potestas coactiva, compulsory power, to place a woman in a good home if she refuses to be guided. You nail no force on the bench where his glove must bruise it before it reaches the quill. He asks whether the bishop has any rights left at all. You point to the infirmary, where honey allowed saved hands, and to the bathhouse, where clean linen saved dignity, and to the porch, where no anonymous posting saved names. Plenty, you say. They have shapes now. The beadle makes poets mop without malice by giving them something else to do. He posts slander fined and no bricks near the rails, and hires the rhymers to copy thanks in decorated hands for the porch. Money takes what applause used to eat. The rhymers, grateful to be needed rather than praised, invent a stanza you can tolerate, a short song for consent asked, contract read, copies given. Children hum it. Husbands remember it. The steward begins to enjoy the sound of music he does not have to clean. Alyssa's no survives winter by becoming three little yeses. Yes to banns read. Yes to witness heard. Yes to contract read aloud when she is ready to bargain rather than beg. She sells one lamb for flour without paying for mercy. The Lily ledger never opens for her because the Guild Fund and the Bath Sisters ledgers kept the bowl hot and the rent tame. She signs in the thanks book for water carried during fever season. After the third Sunday, the miller marries a woman who likes him. The porch claps once like lids. The commissary, chastened into curiosity, asks what to do with widows who want a convent but no fee. You hand him your little scroll, the one you hang wherever doors must learn manners. Complaint without fee, witness heard, charge copied, copies given. Also this card he does not expect, dowry kept in 2 keys. If a woman chooses a veil, her chest chooses a steward and a sister together. He takes the cards like a pilgrim takes bread, surprised to be comforted by something so plain. Custom makes one last attempt to trap a woman who is rich. Joanna, 3 strips, 2 cows, stables of opinion, wants to marry a cooper outside the manor. Merchant rises like a yawn. You post Merchant posted where the reeve reads it with a straight face. Then post no doubling where the steward reads it with relief. Joanna pays without having to confess. She pins thanks for the beadle's daughter, who prevented an egg at a face from becoming a brick. The jail door proves its conversion by surviving a scandal. A chapman whispers to the keeper that a certain widow meets customers after hours. You bring the horn, he brings time posted. The square reads the chalk and finds a lie. The chapman scrubs the post, the widow is invited to the quiet room to pick up copies she didn't need and leave a thanks she wanted to give anyway. The chapman sells rosemary to the infirmary for a week. Gossip learns to make deliveries. The porch attaches 2 tiny rails to its quiet room, one labeled copies given, the other thanks collected. Women start to use both like handles rather than slogans. Alice, dry-eyed now that work resumed, sets a loaf on the rail for the Bath Sisters and pinches a coin for the Honey Fund. You write the numbers in a hand that refuses to be romantic. The priest reads the totals between bands. He enjoys sounding administrative. The chapter inputs your vulgar catechism into its decent books. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named by her, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given, no fines for refusal, no dowry seized, thanks collected. The procurator underlines no dowry seized twice and dryly observes that it will save him so much time not having to argue. You enjoy that kind of conversion more than every tear you have ever watched. It is expensive for nobody. A merchant from the city posted the porch cards on his counting house as a joke. His wife, finding them useful, kept them. His clerks, finding them legible, obeyed. The city wrote to ask for your form's scar book. Thanks, Lily Ledger, quiet room rails. You send all of them, plus a wreath, plus the children's scroll. Theft remains your best apostle. Mid-porch. Give me your 7-word wardship chest law you will actually hammer where a reeve's thumb may touch. Consent asked, contract read, no fines for refusal. Subscribe and tap the bell so part 3 arrives before some legal Latin tries to rename coercion cura again. You end the 2nd chapter where every reform becomes either folklore or furniture, at mouth height, on the step, Rent posted, no quietus without reason. On the bench, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given. On the chest, no dowry seized, key kept by two. On the rail, slander fined, no bricks. On the lintel, rate posted, door bolted, no minors, no force, water allowed. In the quiet room, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named, by her. At the banns, no anonymous posting, names learned. The children rap the beetle once when noise tries to audition for custom. Oak hums the answer that became the county's new weather. Alice, who was supposed to be rent, became a person who schedules bread. The commissary, who was supposed to be pomp, became a clerk with errands. The steward, who was supposed to be appetite, became furniture. The Bath sisters, who were always saints, became policy. The beadle, who loved theater, learned to mop with grace. The porch cards, which used to be unusual, became boring. You have never loved an adjective more. Now we carry this into the places that still trap widows because the page prefers possession to consent. The bishop's back room where spiritual custody learns to spell copies. The guild court where dower disputes become verbs. The assize where sheriffs read thanks before charges. And the manor weddings that make banns sound like a schedule instead of a siege. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next drill lands while your beam still remembers its height. And tell me in the comments your 7-word porch rule you'll actually nail where hands live, consent asked, contract read, no fines for refusal. Type continue and I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the one miracle that beat forges, pillories, hunts, and lanes. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths call coercion care. The guild hall smells like flour arguing with paper, so you set the horn lamp on the scales until a warm coin of light lands where loaves and contracts learn each other's weight. Alice stands beside the beam with her guardian, the baker's widow, while the guild elders unroll a model marriage indenture like an altar cloth. The elder who used to think vulgar cards were an insult taps the parchment and says, "Custom." You hang counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before parchment calls itself providence. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named by her, no fines for refusal, dower listed, key kept by two, copies given, witness heard, thanks collected. The beetle's daughter wraps the scale's arm with the beetle, iron kneels, paper clears its throat and behaves. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that pays for this lamp rather than for letters that think they are gods, and in the comments write the 7-word guild rule you would actually nail beside any scale. Consent asked, contract read, dower listed, copies given. I'll pin the ones that sound like bread and carry them to the next bench before custom hires a festival. You begin with dower, because it is where law pretends to be love. The clerk reads the lines, "To Alice will be given 1/3 of profits from this oven, 1 cow to be lodged with said oven, rights to 2 strips, a chest with tools." The steward's pen hovers, near provided she remain obedient. You slide the horn coin to that word until obedient melts into undefined. Dower listed. Stays obedient loses its teeth. key kept by 2 lands next to chest in a hand Alis recognizes as yours. She names the second key holder again without apology. The baker's widow looks like every sacrament failed by impatience and saved by practice. Contract reading without audience is a trap. You invite one. Witness heard calls the Bath sisters, whose ledgers turned rosemary into policy. The guild clerk with the debt book, the sacristan with the banns, the beadle with his fines, the surgeon who prefers bowls to mourning, the herb wife with honey allowed stamped in her timber. A poet who expected to ridicule reads your cards and invents a chorus instead. A short verse for consent asked, contract read, copies given. Children hum it while they learn to carry cups. Poetry redeemed by work is your favorite commerce. Fines have been the trap's hinge. You sand it flat. The elder points to a clause that demands gift for consent. 3 groats to the Lord when a widow refuses a suitable match. No fines for refusal is already nailed to the chest. You nail it again to the guild post to satisfy the part of you that mistrusts distance. The elder hesitates. Tradition tastes like varnish in his mouth. And then he signs, because vulgar signs prevented a funeral last week. He will pretend to have invented this rule when he tells it to the next parish. Let him. Guardian named by her becomes less theoretical when gossip tries to do its work. A cousin suggests that Alice's guardianship should revert to her future husband once the ceremony ends. You keep the horn on the names. The baker's widow signs the margin next to key kept by 2. Alice signs beneath. The clerk writes standing 90 degrees, because the memory of angle helps shy hands remember the angle of refusal. That detail will save a chest in 3 years when someone claims not to remember. The band's board turns sound into a schedule. The priest reads 3 Sundays with none of the trumpet he used to borrow. The porch listens, then eats. The beadle posts no anonymous posting beneath the bands where cowards used to slip adjectives. The clerk keeps a shelf labeled copies given so women leave with paper, not applause. Alis hears her name spoken as if it were an ordinary noun, not a rentable verb. She smiles the way people smile when the grammar of their town starts to look like theirs. A charges clerk from the manor tries to fasten a heriot rent to the chest, 1 lamb payable to the Lord on marriage. You set horn on the slate until marriage, and sheep repel each other like magnets. No dowry seized is hammered into the chest lid, where the reeve's thumb will bruise it every time he plays custom with hunger. He considers inventing a Latin. He puts his ring away instead. He finds he likes being furniture. Guild inquiry does something radical by being uninteresting. Thanks is read before charges, then returns paid. A baker who misweighed last month pays the last groat and hands Alis a basket for the lily fund. A cooper who sold 1 sour hoop returns pitch. The Bath sisters record steam kept and vinegar ladled. The beadle reads slander fined, 3 mops worth. The poets hum while they work. This is what reform sounds like. Minimum decibel, maximum towel. The quiet room you built for burns and widows now receives the 3rd vocation you suspected, repair. A woman who said yes under a priest who did not pause for contract read to woman aloud asks to hear her own document. You hang the scroll complaint without fee, witness heard, charge copied, copies given, and guard the hinge while she chooses a guardian, lists her dower, and pins no fines for refusal to the inside of her own door. The commissary brings vinegar for the infirmary, and carries the copy to the chapter with the expression of a man who enjoyed being wrong. Copying is repentance. Elise and the Cooper, ready to be interesting in the right way, ask for the thing nobody expects the guild to do with respect. Keep the feast small. You add a line to the porch cards that you stole from the road and the pit, soup before stories. The rhymers come anyway. They sing the chorus you approve of. The beetle taps their plank with the beetle when they try to add adjectives. They mop, mildly. It pays as well as irony did. The assize session crosses the square at an inconvenient angle and finds your porch crowded with paper that behaves. The sheriff's clerk, who expected tragedies, reads consent asked and copies given and no fines for refusal and begins to enjoy a morning without headlines. He says, "Let me have your forms." You give him the quiet room rails, the thanks ledger format, the Lily Fund entry, the band's margin with no anonymous posting drawn in the corner like a joke that paid. The law will take longer, but it will love pointing. Someone always asks whether saints mind. The prior answers by writing, "Honey allowed again," where novices can reach the jar without bargaining. The sacristan answers by pinning names learned under the bans so towns do not misplace people into titles. The priest answers by reading bans like inventory rather than like prophecy. Saints are rubbery when the room smells like rosemary and receipts. The Reeves bench loses a habit without crying about it. Merchant posted was already there. Now refusal free hangs beside it. No doubling lands under it. When a high-handed cousin tries to organ grind the old tune, the Reeve points and saves his voice. He enjoys pointing. He likes breathing after. He likes breathing after. Rivals always test after acceptance. The commissary returns with a new Latin Custodia Animarum, care of souls, with a margin for hard cases. You slide the horn coin across the gloss until it drips. Guardian named, by her, and contract read to woman aloud are nailed under the gloss like marbles, preventing a table from wobbling back into its favorite corner. He reads the nails. He smiles. He agrees to carry towels again. The jail door proves its own conversion by chaperoning its worst instincts. Time posted dictates the door, not sorrow. Access for spouse avoids grandeur. No ordeal talk keeps envy from hiring penitents. Charge copied keeps laughter away from crack. Two children show up with stew. The keeper reads their names from his chalk like bands. Their mother listens in the quiet room. Love might be the only reliable policy. The last trick is a lamb disguised as blessing. The canon suggests a gift to God on the morrow of Alice's wedding. You hand him a lid and a towel and the phrase that defeated 3 different crimes this year, "Thanks collected." He discovers that lifting lids and pouring vinegar satisfy him more than inventing fees. We did not strip anyone of religion. We gave it chores. Mid-bench. Now you leave the 7-word guild rule, you will actually hammer beside any scale anywhere you live. Consent asked, contract read, dower listed, copies given. Subscribe and tap the bell so Part 4 lands before some steward sings Mirabilis over a chest and calls it marriage. You end the guild day as you began, weighing. The scale kneels for bread, the contract kneels for voice, the chest kneels for lids, the porch kneels for bands, the beetle kneels for mops, the bath kneels for steam, the jail kneels for chalk, the law kneels for forms. Alice kneels to pick up her copy and does not kneel to anyone else. She hangs it inside her door beneath door bolted and water allowed, and watches her daughter trace the letters like a girl learning how to be protected without being trapped. And then you leave what you always leave. Sentences where wrists live. On the post, consent asked. Bans read. Contract read to woman allowed. Guardian named by her. No fines for refusal. Dower listed. Key kept by 2. Copies given. Witness heard. Thanks collected. On the chest, no dowry seized. On the rail, slander fined. No bricks. On the bench, complaint without fee. On the bands, no anonymous posting. Names learned. On the infirmary, honey allowed. On the bath, water boiled. Linen boiled. Rosemary steeped. Door bolted. No minors. You will always be accused of vulgarity by men who never had to read their lives aloud. Accept it. Vulgar sentences liberated 6 rooms this winter. You can work with that. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next chapter lands while your beam still remembers its height. In the comments, leave your 7-word guild law you will actually nail, where hands live, consent asked, contract read, dower listed, copies given, and say continue if you want to carry this grammar into bans that outwitted seizures, jail hours that fed love, assizes that learned to read thanks before charges, and the long patience that turns widows into people who schedule bread. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the miracle that made 4 different systems behave this year. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths declare coercion custom. The assize bench arrives pretending to be a traveling conscience, so you set the horn lamp on the sheriff's table until a warm coin of light lands where custom has been auditioning as law. The roll of pleas names widows as obligations, daughters as dowers, debts as weather. The clerk oils his quill the way cooks oil a pan before frying a name. The sheriff clears his throat. The reeve sets the chest where everyone can see it. The beetle's daughter takes the beetle out of her apron and taps the edge of the table so the wood remembers its job. You hang counsel at mouth height. No Latin, no trumpets. Consent asked. Bans read. Contract read to woman allowed. Guardian named by her. No fines for refusal, merchant posted, no doubling, no dowry seized, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given, thanks collected. The sheriff tests each clause with his knuckle. Paper decides to behave. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp paid for, not the one that tries to sell fines as sacraments. And in the comments, write the 7-word assize rule you would nail to a sheriff's bench. Consent asked, contract read, no dowry seized. I'll pin the plainest ones and carry them to the next circuit before a steward pretends arithmetic is mercy. The first case tries to slip through sympathy dressed as taxation, A man says the manor should seize the late baker's best cloak because the widow refused a suitable match that would have kept her. The sheriff points to no fines for refusal and asks for a reason beyond hunger. The man has none. The reeve opens the chest, reads Merchant posted, and finds no line labeled refusal. The clerk corrects the roll merchant when married out, not when refusing, and takes a copy to the porch. Widow, 1. Theory, 0. You enjoy writing arithmetic in wood. The next disputes a dower chest. The groom calls his by right of marriage. Alice holds up the key she chose, and the key the baker's widow holds, and the guild elder reads "key kept by 2" as if it were scripture. The sheriff asks the clerk to read the contract. Contract read to woman aloud keeps the room from pretending memory is consent. The groom tries obedience. The horn's coin makes the word blush into silence. The sheriff smiles the way cheapskates smile when pain leaves without asking for attention. The traveling ecclesiastical proctor brings a bundle of parchment and an appetite for exceptions. He cites wardship of souls and offers spiritual custody for 3 poor women who are vulnerable to persuasion. The sacristan pins guardian named by her to the front of the packet. This door opens from the inside. The Bath sisters come with ledgers that smell of rosemary and vinegar and list days of paid steam and bowls of drinkable water. The surgeon arrives with his basin rules copied in a hand even priests respect. Now bowl hot, water cool, don't rub, honey first, vinegar ring, ash later, comfrey once heat sleeps. The proctor remembers charity likes errands and volunteers to carry lids to the pitch pits. Grace survives. The porch becomes a witness box that cooks. The priest reads banns in a key you trained him to share with wood. No anonymous posting waits under the board like a hand on a latch. Copies given sits on a small shelf so women leave with paper, not applause. 2 poets arrive with snake syllables. The beadle holds up slander fined, then a mop. The audience claps once like lids and goes back to stew. This is what assent sounds like in a town that learned nouns. Assize listens to women who seldom get asked. The Bath sisters give evidence that a miller's breath smells of liquor in mornings and is kind in afternoons. The bread guild shows scales kneeling under horn. The herb wife testifies that honey turned 3 burns into pages, not careers. Alice speaks. The clerk writes. The sheriff nods. The steward enjoys pointing more than pleading. 3 times a man tries to call custom what the porch calls habit. 3 times you set the horn on the line until ink remembers it is not God. 3 times a name leaves with thanks, not with a stanza. The bailiff attempts distraint, executed softly, for the manor's dignity. He wants 1 strip in pledge while the widow decides. Complaint without fee opens the quiet room before his glove can finish its ceremony. Witness heard invites the guild clerk who watched Alice pay rent, bread by bread, and vinegar by ladle. Copies given sends the sheriff away with paper he will read later to a steward somewhere else who thought his knuckles were theology. Dignity discovers it enjoys being corrected under horn. A case from the next parish brings a very old bruise. A girl was married by capture to end a debt. The banns read after the betting. The sheriff reads your bench card in the correct order. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman allowed, and overturns 3 lines of since time out of mind. He says the word void like bread. The beadle's daughter taps the table once, solemn, and scribbles a new page in thanks titled Customs Retired. The poets will sing a dull but decent jig about this one. That's fine. Let the boring songs multiply. Manor elders try to make Merchant impressive by doubling sums for widows who marry outside. Merchant posted, no doubling defeats the idea the way sand defeats white heat. The reeve discovers he likes not being screamed at. The steward discovers he prefers clapping to counting. The sheriff discovers he likes seeing his bench behave in daylight. The word just does not appear. It doesn't have to. Law shows its best face when it cleans instead of calling names. You make the beadle demonstrate his finds by doing them himself. He tosses an egg at a plank, pays a groat into thanks, mops under horn, and hands the mop to a poet who used to be enthused. Laughter becomes policy. People remember better when they move. The jail door gets its audit under travel. Time posted is chalked twice, outside for wives, inside for keepers. Access for spouse hangs like a yoke big enough for love. No ordeal talk sits where envy would otherwise rehearse. Charge copied lies on the table like bread. 2 children deliver stew with names the keeper reads in that new band's voice. The sheriff notices and writes the jail's rules into the assize minute. Paper keeps wanting to be furniture. You keep obliging. You carry the horn to the bishop's back room for the saddest attempt on the docket. Quietus named charity, levied on widows to fund a chantry for the Lord's mother. The procurator begins to explain heaven's accounting. The horn leaks light on the phrase until heaven discovers arithmetic. No quietus without reason is hammered above the cupboard. Thanks buys candles for the infirmary instead. The prior appreciates the trade. Saints do not mind being paid in bowls. The assize ends better than it began, with lists. Thanks is read before charges, then returns paid, then miracles prevented. The sheriff posts consent asked, contract read, copies given to the front of his roll so clerks stop begging memory to be ethics. The priest pins no anonymous posting beside banns as if it were a beatitude. The sacristan stays small. The steward keeps enjoying furniture. The poets mop with grace whenever rhyme forgets how to kneel. Alice signs her copy, hangs it on the inside of her door below door bolted and above water allowed, and teaches her daughter to touch it before tying cuffs. The last test is the wedding itself, which you nurse away from theater into schedule. On the morning of banns complete, the priest reads names. The baker's widow holds the chest key. Alice holds hers. Guardian named by her stands beside her because that is the right direction for a witness to face. Contract read to woman aloud ensures no one recites husband as if it explained power. Banns read makes gossip pay a calendar instead of a fee. Consent asked sounds like bread. The feast becomes bowls before boasts. Soup before stories has made itself at home everywhere, and you let it. The poets sing their dull chorus about copies. The beadle taps the table when a stanza leans toward adjectives. The steward pays the lily fund with relief rather than story. The bath sisters stack towels like doctrine. The dance smells like rosemary. Mid-bench. Now you drop your 7-word assize rail rule into the comments. Something your wrist will happily bruise before your mouth invites custom back in. Consent asked, contract read, no dowry seized. Subscribe and tap the bell so part 5 arrives before a cousin whispers that Merchant went hungry. You leave what you always leave when men are ready to stop pretending thunder is useful. Sentences at mouth height. On the sheriff's table, consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman allowed, guardian named by her, no fines for refusal, merchant posted, no doubling, no dowry seized, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given, thanks collected. On the chest, no dowry seized, key kept by 2. On the porch, no anonymous posting, names learned. On the rail, slander fined, no bricks. On the jail, time posted, access for spouse, no ordeal talk, charge copied. On the bath, water boiled, linen boiled, rosemary steeped, door bolted, no minors. On the cupboard, no quietus without reason. The lamp's coin of light makes the scrolls look human. Alice is not a ballad. She is a person who schedules bread and keeps a chest with 2 keys. The town is not a miracle. It is a place that posted ugly little sentences where wrists could not escape them. You did not need virtue to do this. You needed carpentry, vinegar, honey, and ledgers that loved thanks more than charges. Keep hammering. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next chapter lands while your beam still remembers its height. In the comments, leave the 7-word assize law you will actually nail, where hands live, consent asked, contract read, no dowry seized, and type continue if you want to carry this grammar into manorial weddings that used to be sieges, county courts that used to be songs, markets that used to rent faces, and the long patience that turned forced marriages into published refusals. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the one miracle that keeps beating appetite in every story. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths call coercion care. The manorial chapel is where love is expected to kneel to rent, so you set the horn lamp on the credence table until a warm coin of light lands where vows and dues try to share a chalice. The priest has laid out rings and a psalter. The reeve has placed a chest too close to the altar. The steward stands with a smile that would like to be called providence. You hang counsel at mouth height where wrists have to brush it before mouths can rename appetite as piety. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman allowed, guardian named by her, dower listed, key kept by 2, no fines for refusal, no dowry seized, copies given, witness heard, soup before stories. The beetle's daughter taps the bench with the beetle until the wood hums like a reminder that God is not an adjective for chest. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp honest, not the bell that rings for odes. And in the comments, write your 7-word chapel rule you would actually nail beside an altar. Consent asked, contract read, no dowry seized. I'll pin the strongest and carry them to the next parish, where bands have been mistaken for a net. You begin by moving the chest. The steward jokes that the two sacraments, marriage and manorial custom, should be neighbors. You slide the horn's coin across the lid until custom loses its nerve and witness remembers its job. The reeve drags the box to the porch, under horn, beside no dowry seized and no fines for refusal. He discovers he enjoys pointing more than pleading. He enjoys breathing after. The priest's shoulders drop an inch when wood leaves the rail. Sanctity is lighter when furniture knows where it belongs. The band's board becomes a scale. The priest reads the third Sunday for Alice and the Cooper, and the porch remembers how this lane chose to listen, not by catcalls but by lists. Magda, the Bath sisters, the beadle, the herb wife, the guild elder with the debt book witness, herd turns gossip into arithmetic. One neighbor brings a charge, the clerk copies it. Two others say the opposite. Retracted goes under horn. The priest smiles like a man relieved to share homily with wood. This is what reform feels like. Not thunder, but schedule. Murchett pretends to be music again. A steward from the next manor rides in with a roll that doubles the fee if a widow marries out. The reeve reads Murchett posted, no doubling, and discovers he likes reading better than shouting. The steward tries the phrase since time immemorial. The beadle's daughter sets the beadle on the rail. Time remembers it has to pass through hands. The steward goes home with a copy of your table and the surprising joy of having been corrected in daylight. A wardship case arrives wrapped in Latin. The bishop's commissary claims custodia animarum, care of souls, over a girl of 14 whose uncle wants to sell her refusal. You hang 3 sentences where his glove must brush them before it can reach the quill. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman aloud. He reads, then reads the girl's face, which is louder. He offers religion. Guardian named by her answers before he finishes the sentence. She names the Bath sister who taught her to tie cuffs. Copies are given. Latin remembers it is a language, not a trap. Dinner reaches the square before the wedding can rehearse itself into theater. Soup before stories hangs on the chapel door in letters rude enough to discipline rhyme. The poets arrive. The beadle nods at slander fined. They mop their own plank once and discover the jig about copies given earns better coin than the ballad about obedience. The guild sisters put towels on their shoulders like vestments. The herb wife sets honey by the infirmary bowl. The prior pins honey aloud where novices can reach it without bargaining. When towns post receipts, appetite learns manners. Alice asks for one more miracle you can afford. Contract read to woman aloud in the quiet room. The priest and the clerk carry the scroll into the porch chamber that once held burned wrists and frightened words and now holds both on purpose. The beadle leaves his staff outside because decent men learn to prefer pointing. The contract is read without thunder, dower listed without hurry, key kept by two blessed by boredom rather than by surprise. The cooper signs with a hand that has learned to prefer rhythm to lyric. The girl signs with eyes that have learned to prefer paper to promise. Forced marriages always tried to hide inside feasts. You bankrupt that trick with lists. Thanks collected goes on a small rail by the chapel gate. Bread to the infirmary, vinegar to the ward, rosemary to the baths, lids to the pitch yard, mops to the beadle. People sign names that began the winter as rumors. They discover gratitude pays faster than grief. The stew line swallows jealousy like a sacrament that finally found its cup. The assize clerk asks to borrow your forms and your broom. You give him the quiet room rails, the thanks ledger template, the Lily Fund entry that reads, "Paid before story," the "No quietus without reason" placard that made a canon lower his voice. He walks away looking lighter. Law likes pointing. It just forgets until someone hands it nails. A cousin tries to reboot seizure with a Christian adjective. He calls a widow's cow a tithe, which is to say, mine. No dowry seized bruises his glove. Witness heard embarrasses his Latin. The jailkeeper, who used to indulge ordeal, points to time posted and discovers he likes telling hours more than selling fog. He reads two children's names from chalk when they bring stew. Love acquires a schedule. The square claps once like lids. A second parish steals your cards without asking and sends a letter asking for your method. You pin their letter under horn and write back with nothing you need to keep. Hang sentences where wrists live. Make mops earn more than adjectives. Sell wreaths and cards like tools. Keep bowls hot. Count thanks before charges. You enclose a children's scroll read. Copy, name, witness, post, water, and 6 nails. Theft continues to be your favorite apostle. Now the wedding chooses its weather. No chest near the rail. No fees disguised as incense. Consent asked in a voice that shares work with wood. Banns read that sound like calendar, not fate. Contract read to woman aloud in the quiet room first, then again, briefly, at the porch. Guardian named, by her, standing not behind her, not before, but beside. Dower listed, key kept by 2, recited without romance. No fines for refusal posted where the steward's thumb will bruise it if it forgets. Copies given, placed in the bride's hand and hung inside her door beneath door bolted and above water allowed. The dance smells like rosemary and receipts. Mid-rail, your turn again. In the comments, write your 7-word manorial chapel rule that ties trumpets to ledgers. Consent asked, contract read, no dowry seized. Subscribe and tap the bell so part 6 reaches you before a cousin whispers that Merchant is hungry again. The morning after is the only measure that matters. Alice opens her door and touches paper before pegs. The cooper goes to the guild with coin and a loaf for the Lily Fund. The steward posts Merchant posted. No doubling where he can see it on hungry days. The beadle sleeps later than he used to because fines became plumbing. The Bath sisters boil water and write rosemary steeped in a hand that makes clerks jealous. The herb wife adds a line to the infirmary ledger called Prevented Hymns. The prior pretends he invented it. Children rap the beadle once on the rail and say, enough, the way towns learn to stay alive. There is one more widow on the slate. Her name is Marjorie. Her cousin is Loud. Her dower chest has 1 shoe and a courage you can read only if you nail lines where she can touch them. The reeve opens the porch. The priest reads banns. The clerk lays out complaint without fee. The sacristan pins no anonymous posting. The steward points to no fines for refusal without being pestered. The sheriff's clerk shows up early with blank copies because he has learned to enjoy days without thunder. Marjorie listens to Latin, then to wood, then to her own mouth, surprised to hear itself say, "Read it again." The room does not clap. It makes soup. The corner you feared most, spiritual custody with a smile, tries a final entrance. The commissary returns with velvet folded into humility and offers a place with sisters. No dowry seized is already nailed to the chest. Guardian named by her is already in the quiet room. Contract read has already ruined confidence tricks that rely on confusion. He carries lids to the pitch yard with good grace. You let him. Chivalry that fetches things is a civic blessing. You leave what you always leave when a town decides to outlive its appetite. Not speeches, but hardware. On the chapel door, consent asked. Banns read. Contract read to woman aloud. Guardian named by her. Dower listed. Key kept by two. No fines for refusal. No dowry seized. Copies given. Witness heard. Soup before stories. On the porch rail, no anonymous posting. Names learned. Thanks collected. On the chest, no dowry seized. On the beadle table, slander fined. No bricks. On the jail, time posted. Access for spouse. No ordeal talk. Charge copied. On the bath, water boiled. Linen boiled. Rosemary steeped. Door bolted. No minors. The lamp's coin of light makes them all look ordinary. That is victory. Subscribe and tap the bell so Part 6 lands before anyone thinks to staple Lent to rent again. In the comments, drop your 7-word chapel law you will actually hammer where hands live. Consent asked, contract read, no dowry seized. And type continue if you want to carry this grammar to the county court where sheriffs learn to read thanks. Before charges, the manor ledgers where quietus retires, and the kitchen tables where widows schedule bread instead of selling it to customs dressed as husbands. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the miracle that has already beaten 3 systems that tried to trap poor women. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths call coercion care. The county court unpacks itself like a traveling cupboard, so you set the horn lamp on the sheriff's ledger until a warm coin of light lands where custom usually auditions as conscience. The roll of pleas smells of damp vellum and remembered excuses. Daughters listed as dowers, widows listed as fines, love listed as arrears. The sheriff's clerk balances a pen on his lip as if eloquence could become ethics by posture. You hang counsel at mouth height, where wrists must bruise before mouths can hire Latin. Consent asked, banns read, contract read to woman aloud. Guardian named by her, dower listed, key kept by two, no fines for refusal, no dowry seized, merchant posted, no doubling, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given, thanks read before charges. The beetle's daughter taps the edge of the table with the beetle. Oak hums. Paper decides to be furniture. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that pays for daylight and nails, not the one that rings for spectacle. And in the comments, write the 7-word county rule you would actually hammer to a judge's rail. Thanks read first, consent asked, no dowry seized. I'll pin the plainest and carry them to the next bench before appetite pretends to be providence. You begin with arithmetic that used to hide under sleeves. The sheriff takes the roll. The clerk reads, "A presentment for merchant doubled because widow marrying out." You set the horn on the line until ink remembers it is not an adjective. Merchant posted. No doubling sits on the rail where the reeve's thumb must bruise it. And the steward finds he enjoys pointing more than pleading. The widow pays the posted sum without adjectives. The chest receives the correct coin. The clerk copies the decision. You hang copies given above his table, so this taste survives the next market. The next plea arrives disguised as generosity. A manner suggests commuting refusal into a cow for pious works. No fines for refusal has already been nailed to 3 surfaces. You nail it again to outshout memory. Alice hands the sheriff the page the guild sisters taught her to love. Thanks, water carried, linen boiled, vinegar ladled. The sheriff reads thanks before charges, the way you wrote it. The crowd discovers they prefer clapping for lists. The steward scratches a lily into the ledger out of habit, then crosses it out like a man discovering a clean conscience. Wardship tries a late entrance wearing law. The bishop's commissary explains that a girl named Marjorie threatens to squander grace unless placed under spiritual custody. A guardian named, by her, interrupts him in a tone even novices understand. Marjorie names the bath sister, who knocks on doors with towels and lists. The clerk reads contract read to woman aloud, into the quiet room where Burns, widows, and frightened boys have already learned to rehearse futures out loud. The commissary, bless him, carries Rosemary to the infirmary afterward. Penitence with errands is the only kind this porch will tolerate. The Beadle's Fines book becomes plumbing in front of the sheriff. Slander, fined, sends one poet to a mop and the other to a tune that names receipts. No bricks keeps faces off walls without asking saints for thunder. Egg, groat, and mop proves that humility has a rate. The sheriff enjoys this vocabulary because it does not require speeches. He writes mops supplied into the minute as if listing timber for bridges. It is the same work. A difficult case arrives with grief and arithmetic married against their will. A reeve argues that a chest should be opened because the groom must be obeyed. You set the horn coin on obeyed until it blurs into a hinge that remembers 2 keys. Key kept by 2 rescues the noun dower from the mouth obedience and returns it to the hand inventory. The groom discovers he survives adulthood. He learns to like lids. The priest, curious to see whether wood can make liturgy, reads banns in the key you nailed here months ago. Schedule, not siege. No anonymous posting glows under the parchment like a yoke. The sacristan pins names learned as if saints were census clerks. The clerk's copies, given shelf, fills with paper instead of performance. Women leave with documents rather than neighbors. The square exhales. That sound is why you travel. Eye sizes last long because appetite is patient. You keep a room open that does not audition. The quiet chamber near the porch receives a marriage contract every morning and a retraction every third afternoon. Its rails complaint without fee, witness heard, charge copied, copies given, turn impulses into paragraphs. A bailiff tries to outpace the process with distraint. Witness heard forces his glove to become chronology. The sheriff notes that silence can serve public order without hiring shame. He writes quiet room required into the circuit book. A county learns to house refusal without renting it. Meanwhile, kitchens decide whether all this is weather or habit. You carry the horn to tables where women schedule bread. Apron tied, no bare feet, cool first, cover sparks, no water under oil. The road and forge rules become domestic without losing voltage. The herb wife sells wreaths of forged nails and comfrey. Wives hang your cards beneath like charms that reduce funerals. When a pot hisses, ash moves, lids close, children say enough into a dipper. Your favorite sermon has found its congregation. A merchant tries to resell coercion as romance. He calls a widow rescued because he canceled her arrears with a ring. You pin rate posted on charity and contract read to woman aloud on the dance. Under horn, his poetry tastes like salt. He pays the posted rate, gives an actual gift to the Lily Fund, and honors the door when it remains bolted. Rescue that cannot carry ledgers is just appetite wearing velvet. The sheriff tests whether law can kneel without drama. He orders the roll for damages reversed. Thanks first, charges second, returns paid third, miracles prevented last. People who used to cheer for thunder discover they like clapping for towels. The beadle keeps time with the beetle on the table's edge. The clerk writes custom retired beside 3 items, including refusal fine. You save your breath. Nails did the work. The castle steward arrives with a purse and a poem called Augmentation. He explains that widows benefit from winter protections and should contribute to the steward's ledger. You lay the horn on his claws until beneficence becomes arithmetic. Rent posted is already on the step. No quietus without reason lives behind his elbow. Thanks collected is posted at the infirmary door. He discovers that generosity buys more theology than fees do. He leaves a lid for the pitch yard and takes 2 cards for his kitchen. You regret nothing. Elice comes to court with a question sharper than any plea. What keeps this from unraveling when you leave? You point at the places where wrists live. On the sheriff's rail, where thanks read first, kneels appetite. On the jail wicket, where time posted cancels hush. On the bands board, where no anonymous posting is a crooked halo that actually works. On the chest, where no dowry seized is a bruise that improves a reeve. On the beadle's bench, where slander fined produces mops rather than mobs. On doors where consent asked, contract read keeps sacraments from becoming invoices. Also, you add, you steal the cards. She laughs like a woman who intends to outlive slogans. The poets present a gift you never expected to like. A dull, decent, dangerously catchy chorus children refuse to stop singing. Consent asked, Contract read, copies given. Bans read, witness heard, refusal free. You pretend to be irritated and make them print the words under horn, so the tune has somewhere to live after throats forget it. Culture is now your assistant. The quietest miracle is always the same. Stew before stories. You make the chapel post soup before stories, and the jail door post children named visitors, and watch crowds alter their angle of attention. Law becomes a kitchen where paper is bread. Widows become people who schedule bread. Men become furniture and like it. The assize empties back into fields, and the county keeps the cards. The sheriff reads his new preface at each market. Thanks read first, consent asked, bans read, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named by her, dower listed, key kept by two, no fines for refusal, no dowry seized, merchant posted, no doubling, complaint without fee, witness heard, copies given. Then he locks the roll and points to the porch. The porch points to the bath. The bath points to the infirmary. The infirmary points to the lily ledger. The lily ledger remains thin. That, more than poetry, is our proof. Mid-rail. Now you leave your 7-word county rail rule in the comments, the one your whist will bruise before your mouth can rent a face. Thanks read first, consent asked, no dowry seized. Subscribe and tap the bell so part 7 lands before spring makes everybody sentimental about bad habits. You leave what you always leave when you think you have finished, not applause, but hardware. On the bench, thanks read first. On the rail, slander fined, no bricks. On the porch, no anonymous posting, names learned, copies given. On the chest, no dowry seized, key kept by two. On the bands board, bans read, consent asked. In the quiet room, contract read to woman aloud, guardian named by her. On the infirmary wall, honey allowed. On the bath, water boiled, linen boiled, rosemary steeped, door bolted, no minors. On the jail, time posted, access for spouse, no ordeal talk, charge copied. The lamp's coin of light makes the cards look ordinary. That is victory. Elise is not trapped. She is tired and paid and hungry and unromantic about rest, which is to say, she is alive in the way we can afford. She ties her apron, checks the latch, touches paper before pegs, teaches her daughter to bruise rules with palms, and laughs at a poem she doesn't need. The town smells like rosemary, wax, flour, vinegar, ink, and lids, the scent of a place that chose tools over thunder. Subscribe and tap the bell so the last part arrives while your beam still remembers its height. In the comments, give the 7-word rule you will actually hammer where hands live. Thanks, read first, consent asked, no dowry seized. And say, continue if you want to finish this build. The kitchen tables that replaced interdictions. The spring weddings that sounded like schedules. The bishop's roll that learned to love retracted. And the long patience that made refusal free enough to outlive us. I'll bring horn, chalk, ribbon, tin, vinegar, a basket of cards, and the miracle that has beaten 4 different traps already. Public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths rebaptize coercion as care. Spring writes its verdict in flour and rosemary. So you set the horn lamp on Alice's kitchen table until a warm coin of light lands where law and meals finally share a surface. The table is not a court, and it is not a chest. It is where widows refuse to do magic and do work instead. A loaf cools beside the copy of her contract, hung inside the door, under door bolted, and above water allowed. The 2 keys to her dower chest sit in their places, hers on the peg, the baker's widow's on the hook by the scale, because key kept by 2 is now part of the room the way salt is. Her daughter traces the 4 words under the hinge, consent asked, like a charm that does not require candles. This is the last thing winter owed you, to see the grammar printed into wood. Subscribe and tap the bell, the one that keeps this lamp paid for, not the one that mistakes applause for policy. And in the comments, leave the 7-word kitchen rule you would actually nail above the basin. Apron tied, cool first, cover sparks, door bolted. I'll pin the strongest and carry them to the next table where bread has to outvote Latin. The kitchen becomes your cleanest court. Soup before stories sits at eye level, where hands find ladles before they find adjectives. No water under oil frowns over the pan. Cool first lives above the dipper with 2 nails because children learn faster than bishops. Cover sparks keeps lids within arm's reach of temper. No bare feet guards the threshold where nails wait like tiny laws. Widows' tables are how towns keep themselves when porches are tired, by drilling safety into the hinge of appetite. The first wedding after winter lands on schedule rather than on a roll of dice. Banns read, names learned, no anonymous posting under the board, copies given to anyone who asks, consent asked spoken into the laneway where everybody can hear, the grammar enter the air with the smell of rosemary. The contract is read to the woman aloud in the quiet room before it is read at the porch, and reading it twice makes it boring in exactly the way you saved her for. The chest does not approach the rail. The beadle carries mops but does not have to use them because rhymers now understand that slander find earns worse coin than a dull jig about lids. The bishop's role surprises itself by enjoying honesty. The sacristan has grown fond of carrying the horn lamp to the margin where mischief liked to nest. The procurator now begins his page with 3 questions the porch taught him: witness heard, copies given, reason named. When he cannot answer, he does not write. Quietus gets embarrassed into tidy corners. Augmentation loses a vowel and becomes not today. The chapter begins to measure Advent in towels distributed and vinegar ladles, and nobody thinks it diminishes the Psalter when rosemary smells like good doctrine. A size returns to the square and starts on your favorite line, thanks read before charges, because the sheriff learned he prefers applause that asks for no rope. The Bath Sisters' slate is read without anyone pretending to be pious for having washed. The Guild posts returns paid, so audience brains stop confusing decibels with decency. A stew of gratitude replaces the old hunger that chased thunder. The beadle taps the rail now for timing, not warning, which means his hand finally learned what the beadle is for. The last counterfeit protection tries one more verse. A cousin offers a marriage to a man with connections, which is to say, debts. He suggests that resisting might still incur a fine as example. The chest is too far from the rail to save him. No fines for refusal nails his glove to arithmetic. Complaint without fee opens the quiet room for the cousin who wants to talk. And witness heard pulls in the two women who have kept the lane from hiring miracles, one with towels and one with vinegar. The cousin chooses to applaud rather than argue. This is Reform's favorite hobby, to teach someone to prefer pointing to explanation. Alice's table spends 3 afternoons a week after the feast month hosting the part you cannot legislate, the habit of saying, "Read it again." Women bring contracts. The clerks of 2 parishes bring copies. The beadle sits where his staff isn't and learns to let paper do the work. Widows practice refusing. Girls practice asking for the line that begins "guardian named" by her. One woman who said "yes" in an older tone learns how to add "key kept by 2" to a chest already half-lived. The table is not a sacristy, and it is not a bench. It is wood that persisted until law decided to be dull. Spring drifts down the road you changed and finds your sentences stuck to new posts. The steel me shelf horn, cards, wreath, ladle, honey, vinegar, ash, cloth, scroll has been stolen twice and replenished thrice. A rider from the marsh town brought your forms back in a different hand. The scar book's columns and thanks ledger, the porch rails, and the jail chalk line. He enclosed the one line you didn't send him and he didn't want to invent, no ordeal talk, and pinned it to his own wicket. Tired justice now equals scheduled visitation. You keep pretending to be astonished by the ease of useful theft. Keep it up. The whole craft depends on people who don't wait for permission to copy. The household inventory where custom lived now reads like stewardship, not like predation. Where it used to show the chest and the cow as 2 fonts of future fines, it now shows how thanks bought daily bread for the infirmary, vinegar for the ward, lids for the pitch yard, mops for the beadle, towels for the bath, honey for the bowl, nails for the bands board. The steward writes a line he enjoys aloud, surprising himself. Refusal free saves coin. He posts it under horn, like a joke that works because it paid for itself. You send a sheaf of blank signs and a wreath tucked in a cheese to the next market down the river. And their reply is a forearm with a bruise in the right place. They hammered no dowry seized to the chest and found they liked breathing after. They pinned no anonymous posting under banns and discovered how much time they had saved by being bored. They wrote retracted into their margins with such joy you forgave their Latin. Poets settle finally into the dull virtue you wanted from them. During wet markets, they sing the consent chorus. Children refuse to stop humming. Consent asked, contract read, copies given, banns read, witness heard, refusal free, and then they walk copies to whoever asks, like ushers. You pay them, as in you pay them money to do work. They mop when slander creeps toward their throat. They have learned that you will tip for restraint. The jail door's chalk columns fatten more with thanks than with charges. The keeper learned to announce children named visitors at the end of his shift as if it were the Angelus. His hand no longer twitches when a cousin suggests extra for caution. He points to time posted and enjoys the fact that this is what decency feels like on a wrist. Love has a timetable and thus a chance. You get accused of impertinence by an old man who came to admire the chest and left disappointed. "Where is the poetry?" he asks, as if tragedies owe him strings. You point at the towels by the bath, at the lids by the pitch yard, at the thanks ledger thick as barley, at the scar book full of verbs wiser than pride, at Alice's table where women ask to hear their lines out loud. You point at the band's board where no anonymous posting has kept 3 families from buying syllables they would have regretted. The poetry, you finally indulge him, is in the dull places that afforded you the leisure to ask that question. One last manufactured catastrophe burns through winter's leftover kindling. A reeve across the county doubles Merchant and renames it Aid. The sheriff, holding your circuit preface, reads "Thanks" first, 2 pages of towels, vinegar, lilies, then charges, 1 page of invented Latin, then returns paid, a scrawny mule, then miracles prevented, a list of refusals that did not have to learn blood. He nails no doubling to the rail and returns the mule with a wreath. The steward discovers that receiving thanks tastes better than inventing dues. He learns to prefer lids to drums. Elise teaches her daughter to mend the part of the world that touches skin. Not to carry all of it, nobody asked that, but to bruise her palm on consent asked before she chooses anything for her body. To bruise her palm on door bolted before she opens to any voice louder than she is. To bruise her palm on cool first before she touches a pot. To bruise her palm on names learned before she expects saints to pronounce them for her. To bruise her palm on thanks collected before she spends the word miracle. That is how centuries get scheduled. You write a letter you will not know gets read, because reform is rude that way. You pin it under horn at the porch for travelers to steal. It contains no metaphors and all the tools. The porch cards, the jail chalk, the bath slate, the lily entry, paid before story, the quiet room rails, the scar book verbs, the no white heat tricks for tar, the apron tied for ovens, the no lances for bore. It ends with the only advice you have earned the right to give. Hang sentences where wrists live. Let gratitude beat grievance. Schedule love. Starve rumor. Price repentance like mops. And call refusal free until the habit outlives you. The last wedding in this series chooses to be uninteresting in the highest sense. The contract is read in the quiet room with 3 women present. The chest stays chained to its doctrine. The band's board bears no lies. The stew server has already posted soup before stories. The beadle's daughter has to tap no one. The poets count their copies before humming the children's chorus. The sheriff's clerk writes no doubling in a margin that used to be a trumpet. Alice blesses the cake by asking first who ran the bowl and who kept the towels hot. Lids everywhere keep their contracts. This is where I leave the kit in your hands and ask for the small currency that lets me keep running it down the road. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next 7-part build lands while your beam still remembers its height. In the comments, leave 2 gifts for another table and another widow who needs to hear herself. Your own 7-word porch law you will actually nail at hand level. Consent asked, Contract Wed, no fines for refusal, and the next theme title you want hammered into drills under horn. Try one of these or make your own. How Parish Bells Outran Gossip. Why City Walls Ate Generals. What Market Stalls Taught Ministers. Will Shoulder Horn, Chalk, Ribbon, Tin, Vinegar, A Basket of Cards, The Beatles Beetle, The Bath Sisters Rosemary, The Sheriff's Preface, The Scar Book, The Thanks Ledger, and the only miracle this channel will keep advertising until it goes out of fashion, public sentences at mouth height, repeated until wrists remember them before mouths rename coercion as